Hello, Malcolm. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today, especially because we're talking about a big misnomer in the demographic collapse world, which is that Muslims are going to take over the world because they're going to have perpetually high fertility, which is just not true, as Camille recently pointed out on X. And what's most interesting is when you go into what various Islamic countries and Muslim majority countries are trying to do to keep their birth rates up, it's basically a buffet, an overloaded buffet of all of the disparate policies that the different camps of the prenatalist movements want. There's the culture stuff, which, we're always like, it's the culture, it's the culture, it's the culture. Well, they did that stuff. And then there's it's the payout people. Well, it's all about them giving money and cash payouts and cash payouts. Well, they're doing that. And then there's also the people who are like, no, it's traditionalism and, early marriage. It's the marriage. Well, they're doing that too. And guess what? They're also doing the whole thing of scaling back family planning, like taking away access to birth control and abortions. And that's not working either. And so I think it's really important to look at the Middle East and Islamic countries as a case study and say, all right, so there is this world in which everyone got their way. All the prenatalist leaders with all their disparate little pet projects got their way. Why is it not working?
And I'd point out here, then people are like, well, don't some Muslim populations have a high fertility rate? Muslims are not high fertility, they're poor, okay? This is a mistake that people make. Muslims actually have a lower fertility than Protestant groups when you control for income. And their fertility rate is so low that despite the relative poverty of the Middle East, only Iran, you were saying, what was it, Iraq?
Only Iraq. Only
Iraq
beats Israel. Because I think Israel's a really great, like, here's where we are with developed non-Islamic Middle Eastern nations. I think it's a really good base. And of course, it's the ultra-Orthodox Jews that are really propping this up. They're killing it. They're doing great, but they've figured it out.
So in this episode, what we are going to be covering is crashing fertility rates around the Islamic world, crashing fertility rates within the Islamic diaspora, what the Islamic communities are attempting to do to decrease this.
And there's some really, there are some policies in here that are so insane in terms of over the top. You will not believe it, Malcolm. I'm like, what? So there's some good stuff in here.
Great. Okay, let's go.
And then try to figure out, what do we learn from this? Because they're not working. So there's a Cremio. This was all inspired by him because he's so freaking amazing. We love him. He posted on X basically like a clarification to people, because especially in X, there's a whole like, the Muslims. He writes, there's a myth that the Islamic world has figured out fertility, but it has not. They show the same declining fertility rates that other places have. Barring Iraq, the Middle East has lower fertility rates than Israel. And hopefully you can put this graph that he shared up on the screen, showing this just overall declining fertility graph and infertility rates, births per women in the Middle East, basically, with Iraq at the top, then Israel, then Algeria, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Oman, Libya, and so on, with the UAE at the bottom. But I love the UAE because you're going to see they have my very favorite prenatalist policy. I can't wait to get to it. And this graph that we're seeing really tracks global fertility rates in general. And that's an argument that Cremio makes in the comments of this thread, where people are like, oh, what about this? What about that? And he's just pointing out, no, everywhere this is happening. And that, I think, is a really important theme of all this. So he continues in his thread, exceptions, maybe Yemen and maybe Palestine, both of which have terrible data. So their comparative situation is unclear. But two things on that. Firstly, Jewish fertility is ahead of Arab fertility in Israel. And he shows a graph of fertility rates in Israel of basically the average number of births per woman for Jews and others in Israel, and then Arabs in Israel. And what's really interesting with this graph, if you're just listening, Arabs in 1990 were at 8 kids per woman, and Jews were hovering a little bit below 4. They were at 3.49. And now in 2018, or at least as of 2018, they were basically at exactly the same spot, 3.05 for Jews and 3.04 for Arabs. And so Arabs just are freaking plummeting. And there's something, this is why we're always so interested in Jews and Jewish culture and like what's going on in Israel, right? Because they are holding strong in the face of modernity. So anyway, Cremio continues. Secondly, Israeli fertility might be just ahead or slightly behind Palestinian fertility, depending on the source. Israeli growth is definitely ahead of Palestinian growth due to immigration, Palestinian emigration, and Palestinian mortality. So he shows another graph, fertility rates, births per women in Palestine and Israel. Again, Palestine, Arab, Islamic, Muslim, going down, Israel, holding steady. So he continues. So, no, I don't believe in Islamic excellence in fertility. Even their famously fecund culture is not immune to the global baby bust, not in Denmark. And then he shows basically after Muslim immigrants spend some time in Denmark, their fertility plummets. They normalize to normal Denmark fertility levels. He continues, nor in France. And even if we look at second generation immigrants, not shown in the graph he had, but linked below, and we can link to his same sources. And then he shares his sources. And basically he shows that the diaspora that's Middle Eastern also doesn't have great fertility. So once they leave, because a lot of people were like, okay, yeah, fine. In these countries, they're bad. But then, they go to other countries and that's where they're spreading so much. But no, sweeties, no. So like one, the source is drying up. And two, once the diaspora goes out there, they drop in fertility even faster. So I think what's really important is that the stereotype exists for a reason, right? That, Muslims are high fertility because this is a culture and a religion that supports that, like traditionally, you think of traditional Muslim families and it's young marriage. It's a lot of children. It's very traditional gender roles, right? So you think like these guys they're going to be the fine ones. No one's going to have trouble with them. We don't have to worry about them. And indeed, these countries have really, at least after they've gotten over freaking out over too much population, they've really put in a lot of effort.
When they started a lot earlier. So for example, Iran, as an example, started its massive fertility efforts about 10 years ago. So what's interesting about the data we have from these countries is they give us a lot of data on long-term and quite dictatorial implementation of often the most aggressive forms of pronatalist policy that people can imagine.
Yeah, because from the 1980s to the 2000s, fertility in Iran dropped from 6.5 to 1.7 children for women. So like Iran is especially boned, and they're also kind of the leader in like fertility obsession. I mean, I kind of see them as like the Hungary of the Middle East, like they're kind of the ones who are like, yeah, rah, rah, rah. So in terms of their policies, they've totally reversed their family planning programs. They scaled back their birth control programs. And even in 2014, they proposed bans on vasectomies to restrict sterilizations and encourage higher birth rates, very similar to what's going on in China. So stuff that, China's like just getting used to. This is like old conversations in Iran. So they also have cash payments for additional child. Oh, all the socialists love this, Lyman Stone, super happy, right? He loves this stuff, right? And then on our part, they have a big cultural push for pronatalist policy. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has publicly condemned contraception as a Western influence, promoting larger families as a national and Islamic duty. So this is clearly, at least on a national level, they're really trying to push prenatalism as this is good, this is for your country. And then they, of course, have various bills proposed that are supposed to penalize the promotion of contraception, which is very similar to stuff that's been proposed in Project 2025. So there's a lot of parallels, but they've already been there, which is important.
Yeah. And we can see from this that Iran actually has had its fertility rate go up a little bit recently. So it's not that the policies are having no effect.
Yeah. But, and if anything, and I think Cremieux would argue this, the cash payments are probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
And we can have a separate podcast about this. He's kind of changed my mind a little bit about direct cash transfers.
Oh.
Yeah, we could have, I think it's important for us to, when we moderate our views.
That's so topic, but let's talk more about the other policies.
Yeah, let's go to Turkey, which I fell down the other, like, I think a year ago. Turkish hospitals where women are giving birth. It's like a whole thing. These are like luxury hospitals. You get all the flowers, you get all these, like there's a small economy built just around huge decorations and celebrations and meals and parties, like literally held for you in the hospital. And they're like celebrity doctors delivering kids. Like I can already tell, even before reading about Turkey's prenatalist policies, that this is a country that's really making it cool. And what I think is important there is when I see it on Instagram, like when people are flexing it on Instagram, it's not like a cringe thing that, like, how the CCP is kind of trying to pressure people into have kids. They don't think it's cool. But no, in Turkey, like they're actually flexing it on Instagram. They're actually excited about it. And I think that's really important to note. But, in general, what I think is really funny is that Erdogan has repeatedly urged families to have at least 3 children. And he frames family planning and contraception as treason, which is amazing. It's
Treason, I love
treason
it.
against
Treasonous
Turkish
act.
nationalism, treasonous people. So, I mean, I think they take a step beyond the Iranian thing of just like, this is for your country, it's your duty, it's national. It's like, no, you're freaking treason for not having kids. Treasonous. I love that. But also back to stuff that, a lot of people really advocate for, including Cremieux, including all the people who are like, yes, Marxism. They have housing support. They have maternity benefits. They have tax breaks. I think tax breaks are great for families. They have subsidies for newlyweds, which is big, and also campaigns to reinforce traditional family structures. So, the sort of the heritage camp, the religious traditionalists would love that, right? Early marriages support the family. And then they also have extended maternity and parental leave policies. Really, with these, the funny thing about maternity leave and parental leave is I only really hear non-pronatalists advocating for it, because
They always
basically,
advocate when they hear a pronatalist advocating for something, they get really mad and they're like, "Why aren't you advocating for this?"
and that's because it's really like the funny thing is there's not actually any expert in the pronatalist world that's like, yeah, extended parental leave really helps, because it really doesn't. Like there are definitely people who are like, cash payments are very important and we really should be investing in these, and here is actual robust evidence. And then cultural things really do help. There's robust evidence. No one's really standing extended parental leave, but they're still trying, and every little thing
It's
helps. And I
not
think
that
that
it
does.
doesn't help any families, but I think it's something that should be relegated by industry, and not
Yeah.
holistically,
Yeah, like for some, work from home is just such a better policy. But if you work in food service or in hospitals and things like that, and you have to show up, then it's very
And
effective.
then per industry, I think it should be the child care center should be the responsibility of the company.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
If they're going to demand that somebody comes to work, which I'm totally okay with.
Yeah. So let's fly over to Saudi Arabia, whose TFR has declined from over 7 in the 1970s, woof, to 2.4 in recent years. So the government has been a little bit less aggressive in this case with prenatalist policies, I think, because they're like, oh, 2.4 is fine. Like, we're doing great. But they are focusing more on economic diversification. And I think that's actually really smart, because another element that really predicts good fertility is good economic prospects. And I think Saudi Arabia very reasonably is like, we can't depend on this one industry forever. So
No.
I think they're doing the right thing, but they're also doing the cultural reinforcement thing. The state-backed clerics are really pushing for having a family. There aren't really that many explicit government campaigns, but I think we're going to argue later that actually kind of backfires. And they do have subsidies for housing, subsidies for education, subsidy for healthcare. And while these things aren't directly branded as pronatalist, they are. Like, they definitely can help. And then also they have extended maternity leave, which again, I don't know. So Qatar, I guess, how some people say it, they have a 2 to 3 fertility rate. And they also have housing grants, child allowances, state-sponsored programs promoting for traditional family. Again, the Heritage Camp loves that. They have free or subsidized maternal healthcare and child healthcare, which again helps. Like in terms of more births, whole thing about this is a fertility stack. It's a bunch of factors. Most of these countries have multi-pronged strategies here. We've got the payouts, we've got the extended leave, we've got the cultural leadership. And it's still not working. But let's go to the UAE, because this is my very favorite. Okay. One, they have one of the lowest fertility rates in the region. They're at 1.5 to 1.7. So at the US level, or maybe a little lower. And the US, the Emirati government, it's uniquely concerned, I think, about kind of cultural genocide, which they should be. We cite them as one of the classic examples of people who are going to disappear, like South Koreans, like Emiratis, Native Americans, Jains. They're on that go-to list we give. Obviously, they have childcare incentives and childbirth incentives. So they give subsidies and benefits for Emirati families, like education support, healthcare support, and they have national identity campaigns that sort of are be proud to be Emirati. But here's my favorite thing. Can you guess? I hope you haven't read my outline, but can you guess?
No.
Okay. Would you get married, Malcolm? This reminds me of that comedy skit you shared with me on what is it going to take to get you married?
Comedy
But
skit, whatever.
they literally, I feel like they're doing that in the UAE. They're like, hey, okay, what if we gave you $20,000 for a wedding? Like literally, this is beyond like having a kid. They will give you money for your wedding. So they have this thing called the marriage fund, and it provides financial grants to Emirati men to cover wedding costs in hopes that they will encourage early marriage and family formation. Like in most cases you can't qualify. Well, obviously you can't qualify if you're not Emirati, but also you won't qualify in most cases if you've been married before. So they're like really trying to target like first time young marriages. And so I'm like, this is insane. Like this can't actually exist. But no, it definitely does exist. According to one source, getting married is also an extremely expensive affair in the UAE. Emirati women can officially demand a maximum dowry of up to, what is this currency called? Of up to 20,000 dirhams, though families often set much higher amounts. So there are dowries. And then the average cost of a UAE wedding has been reported to be in excess of 300,000 dirhams. So that's approximately $81,677, which is
$81,000 you get?
no. That's how much like a wedding can cost. Like a typical wedding in the UAE can cost.
And
So
the government pays for it.
but like because this is a problem, like the government's like, oh, culturally this is kind of an issue, but also like we don't want to get rid of our culture. So what do we do? Well, I guess we'll pay people for weddings up to 20,000 US dollars. So then that like cuts it down 20,000.
What does a traditional UAE wedding look like?
I mean, it's gotta be great, man. But yeah, there's some like one of the reasons why this grant program began is there's some speculation that Emirati men are choosing to marry foreign women in order to save money. So this brings us back to the passport bro thing
I
of
just
like,
looked up UAE wedding, and it's a bunch of Emiratis marrying foreign women.
that's the only way to
Actually,
make it sustainable.
my
That's the only
sister was
way.
proposed to by an Emirati royal.
What?
Yeah, I won't say her name on air, but yeah, my sister had a marriage proposal from one of the, if I remember correctly, one of the Emirati royal families. One of the big ones too, actually, not like one of the side ones.
That is insane. That is insane. Well, but okay, this fund though, I'm obsessed with this fund. Like literally, here's your wedding money. The fund is led by a committee which is selected by the UAE government to enable nationals who are battling to raise the funds to cover their wedding expenses. So they give away approximately 3,000 grants on an annual basis, where couples can expect around 70,000 dirhams, and that's about $19,000. And they get 30,000 upon the announcement of the marriage, and then the rest is handed to them once they've begun their wedding plans. So you have to kind of like show that like the wedding's actually going to happen, but you get like 30,000 up front. And in addition to providing the financial assistance of this grant, they also provide guidance for couples before their wedding ceremony on like lectures and like how to handle sexual relations. And then also 300 UAE nationals are married in group weddings hosted by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. So also like literally if you are okay with a group wedding, and I guess a lot of women are probably like, no, not for me, you need to do all the things, but like it's also hosted by the Sheikh. Like I don't know, I feel like that could be decent.
I've been to these sort of group events in the UAE before that are hosted by like royal, and they can be pretty decent.
Yeah, I mean like they're in a palace, right? I mean often what you're outlaying a lot of cash for is to get married in a palace with a lot of food. The only problem is that it's not, you're a special day, Malcolm, and I don't think you get the whole thing for women. It's supposed to be all about the woman. What about her? But anyway, you can't have a group wedding. But that is a pronatalist policy that is so out there. And I get the cultural reasons and everything, but I'm just like, man, like we're just trying to scrape together for like $5,000 per kid had in the United States. And like, here's the UAE, and they're like, here's $20,000 for your
wedding. Oh my God, I love it.
Yet. I just think it's so great. You know, Egypt, if we're moving on, has a relatively high TFR at 3, but the government has it's also focused on reducing fertility. So they're still kind of like transitioning from the, oh my God, we have too many people. Still, they provide subsidies for food, education, and healthcare.
Really unique. They have a pretty high fertility rate, right?
3. Yeah.
Yeah, they're at 3. And they are massively overcrowded. Egypt is a great example against the argument that it is about
Oh, having space, having
And
Lebensraum.
you keep in mind, if you just look at like the land mass of Egypt to the fertility rate of Egypt or the population of Egypt, you're like, what? No, they have a very low density of population. And then you
Uh,
look at like a light map of Egypt or a population map of Egypt, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. You can only live in like 2% of the Egyptian landmass. The rest
yeah,
of it is a horrifying
because it's
desert.
a freaking
Um,
sand.
and if you go to Egypt, I've driven around there. It is super, super crowded, super, super people stacked on top of people,
Mhm.
and yet the fertility rate is really high.
Yeah.
That actually might be an interesting question to explore is why is the Egyptian fertility rate as high as it is?
Yeah, yeah, and well, and also, like, even in the face of them really the only interventions they've placed so far to be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, slow down. Like, can we not?" So, because Iran did that and it worked really well. So I don't know if it's poverty. I'm guessing that that's it. I mean, that was like I 90% confident that that's just the case. But I just want to, like, bring it together. This is a who's who of everyone's pet policies. We've got the cultural and religious messaging. We've got the economic incentives, including like direct subsidies, tax breaks, grants for housing and education, wedding payments. We have early marriage promotion. Heritage is happy with that. All the marriage people are happy with that. The religious conservatives are happy with that. And then scaling back family planning. All the people who are like abortion is murder and contraception is killing you and making you infertile. Like, again, these are all the things.
So this
Nothing
is
is missing.
really interesting, by the way. I was just looking at the differential average yearly incomes.
Uh-huh.
So Iran's is $5,300. Iraq's is $4,137.
Mm.
And Egypt's is $3,636.
Well, there you go.
So it
The
is
more
just
money you have.
significantly poorer. That's
Yeah. More money, few kids. Okay. I mean, unless you make a ton more and then suddenly you have more kids. But I think so the thing here though is that it's not working. The payouts, everything else. I mean, Cremieux, if he were here, might argue, well, you don't know what the counterfactual is. You don't know how much lower their fertility would be if they didn't provide these subsidies and this cultural support and everything else. I think it's more in the execution, honestly. I think that as Arya Babu pointed out, when you look at countries that are on the whole culturally conservative, where it's like this oppressive miasma that you have to walk through everywhere, you're not like endogenously excited to have kids.
yeah.
You feel like it's forced on you, and then it becomes this burden, and then you're really concerned about having kids. I even think about the case of Turkey, where I fell down this Instagram loop of these insane hospitals and celebrity doctors and in beautiful delivery rooms and parties and balloons and flowers. These women were not having a lot of kids. This was like a first or second kid. And I
Well, and
think
I
they
think
were like, where this backfired is they're like, oh yes, our culture idolizes the mother and like blah, blah, blah. But then the way that women are doing it is like, well, okay, well then I'm going to front, I'm going to show how much, how many designer clothes I have my kids in and how fancy my kids' daycare is. And then they can't afford to have a big family.
which
You know what I
Peru
mean?
does a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like these giant parties for their kids. Like we don't do birthdays for our kids. I don't see the point of a birthday party.
Well, they don't like them. I mean, we're doing what Malcolm calls kid maxing, where we actually just do what the kids really like instead of what we feel like we're supposed to do as good parents. So for their birthdays, we do whatever it is their favorite activity is. Malcolm takes them to a store and they get to choose whatever they want, which costs a tiny fraction of an entire birthday party. We go to a store and we buy whatever their favorite food is. Like for Torsten, it's just tons of fresh berries. And then, for him, he doesn't want a cake. He wants a candle and a dinosaur nugget. And so we do it. Whereas other parents would be like, no, you have to have a cake and you have to eat, and like, then they cry and they're overstimulated and there's like kids
You would just Google if the kid wanted a cake or something like that. How do I make a good cake?
Yeah.
Of the type they want. Like you just make it, right? Like
which is what we do for our kids who like cakes. We've never bought a cake as a family. Have you realized
you
that?
even see this in the United States where, in our episode, we were talking about how progressive social media significantly mentally hurts people and conservative social media doesn't. Somebody was like, well, yeah, that's because you're talking about the modern US definition of conservative.
Mhm.
If we were talking about the conservative culture of the past, social conformity and shaming and like
Mhm.
instead of vitalism and excitement about your ancestry and who you are, you know, modern conservatism is much more based around vitalistic positive nationalism,
Yeah.
whereas historic conservatism is based around, having the nun watching you and making sure you're not breaking any of the rules.
Yeah. And then
And
again, this is all about intrinsic versus extrinsic. When it is extrinsic, when it's forced on you, or
well,
even when
you
you
can
are,
have an extrinsic, intrinsic force. The
uh-huh.
individual who goes online and is so proud of their conservative tradition and is shaming other individuals for doing things like, let's say, like masturbating or being gay or something like that, right? Like this individual is the type of conservative that's dying out. And I think that they don't realize that they're not really part of the governing apparatus that's going to exist within the conservative movement going forwards, because it's
Mhm.
become a fundamentally vitalistic movement instead
Mhm.
of a nanny state movement. And I think that this is where a lot of these nanny state types have begun. They're like those progressives who haven't woken up of it's like, oh, we're the party of the imperialistic authority.
Mhm.
Like these people haven't woken up and be like, we're not the party of the imperialistic authority. And when they have that wake up, they're like, oh, I'm actually a progressive. I just didn't realize that the parties had flipped yet.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. But I mean, so like when I'm trying to think through like, okay, what would I do differently if I were these countries? And also when, for example, the United States does actually decide to invest maybe a lot of money, but also at least more policy effort into prenatalist policies, how can we go about all these things? How can we go about the fertility stack of more births in a way that's actually effective? Because they're doing the fertility stack and it ain't working. And so the question is, how do we do that right? Like if it's the UAE, I it's clearly a problem that like weddings can cost over $80,000. But like maybe instead of shoving out money to people on a limited basis, because that's only 3,000 couples per year, you could just be like, well, anyone who wants to book my palace as a venue, the palace booking is free. You can use my staff and the food is at cost. Like how can you use existing government resources to just make this more doable or change the standards? I mean, I know that they want to keep Emirati culture, but I also don't think that Emirati weddings always cost that much, because I just don't think Emirati families always had that much money. Like, I don't think traditional Emirati culture is like nouveau riche, if you know what I mean. Like,
It is now, buddy, and it is now. There's
they don't want
plenty
to
of
like,
sexual cities
no,
in here.
our culture is nouveau riche. I'm a real
It's
housewife.
garishness for the sake of garishness.
Yes. I mean, power to the people. But like, if you want to do garishness for the sake of garishness, then like, how can the government do that in a more scalable and efficient way? Because while with this grant program, they're expanding it now to make it more available to people at all income levels, they only at first made it available to people at lower income levels. And then like, you're sort of limiting the program, that you're still dissuading people. And then like all the rich people are just marrying Russians and Americans and Italians, and it's just not working. But also like, how do you support this endogenous self-motivated culture? And I think that that's, like having these government messages like Turkey's, it's treason to not have more children, it's treason to use birth control, gets a little creepy, like just a little, like, I don't know, it goes too far. So I feel like, I don't know, how would you, aside from cultural sovereignty, which I think is the key thing, is like homeschooling, let the weird cultures be weird, let people do their own cultural thing, and encourage weird religious subcultures and cults and all that stuff. Like, what would you do on the culture front?
The culture front.
Just sovereignty, cultural sovereignty.
I mean, I think, in the past, the United States has funded and put pressure on Hollywood to make movies that are nationalistic, that celebrate things like our military or
Hmm.
celebrate things like national pride.
Yeah.
Our school system had entire holidays created around this sort of celebration, like 4th of July. And today, it's like 4th of July, but with qualifications. And I think
Yeah.
we remove the with qualifications. Have a day every year where you unironically as a country celebrate how awesome you are, which America has so many reasons to do. Like if you are not just wildly brainwashed and uneducated, you'd be like, wow, America's like a really awesome country and like the grand scale of countries. People are like, well, what about slavery? It's like it contrasted was like the great things American has done, the like bad things we've done are just not particularly detracting from the greatness of the country.
Hmm.
We won a world war and then focused on rebuilding the economies of the people we defeated while keeping them as autonomous countries and not
Yeah.
taking their land or money or
Yeah.
like that hadn't been done before. The idea of let's help the people we just defeated, that was a look at like the end of World War One. It was all reparations and punishment and dividing up.
Oh, yeah, well, and clearly it went wrong, and we saw that, and we learned from it. So it's, I mean, there's also at least,
No, it's not that. It was so they when at the end of World War II, there was this moment where the Americans were bringing everyone to the table, and they're like, "Okay, we're setting the agenda for this," and everyone expected that what the Americans were going to do was going to be to carve up their countries and take their land,
yeah,
or gives them like really horrible terms. And America was like, "No, we're gonna like help rebuild. We're gonna like make everything." And apparently, like everyone was shocked. They were like, "Wait, what? You're gonna do what? You're gonna give us money? You're going to send us engineers to rebuild the things you destroyed? You're
yeah,
going to, what are you talking about? Like, sorry, America, we need to take you aside. This is not what you do when you defeat somebody. America has been, we denigrate the concept of the melting pot today, and yet it is where all of American culture comes from. If you today look at American cinema, this is downstream of Jewish refugees often. If you look at American technology, these are our Nazi scientists. If you
mhm.
look at America music, pretty much all forms of American music that have been globally influential came from Black people. By this, what I mean is if you look at modern, for example, rock music, modern rock music came from blues music, which was a predominantly Black form of music. If you look at modern, sorry, did I say rock or country music?
You said rock.
Oh, sorry. Country came from blues. Rock and roll came from jazz and blues. And if you look at hip hop, obviously a Black form of music. If you look at modern American pop music, it often came from like rock and country, which again come from Black forms of music. All of American music is, whether you're talking about the countryest of country song, is ultimately heavily, heavily, heavily influenced by predominantly Black music. And that's okay. Like that's something that all Americans have pride in. Like I have pride in country music. I listen to lots of country music.
Yes.
So yeah.
So yeah, I guess more investment in media that supports it, which actually a big theme in the comments on the Cremu thread where he pointed to these falling fertility rates was this is Western culture diffusing into Middle Eastern culture and Western values polluting it. And I'm sure that's a factor, and I mean, also this rampant consumerism. I mean, the fact that nouveau riche has become the aesthetic of the UAE 100% is not helping with birth rates. Like it is not helping. It can only hurt. So I think you're right there. And in terms of the economic incentives, I think the tax breaks are great. I think income tax breaks from a demographic collapse perspective is very good at incentivizing the creation of more high taxpayers, because people who pay high taxes and would be excited to pay less of those taxes are also likely to produce through their children future high taxpayers. So it's like you're getting greater bang for your buck. I feel like that grants for housing sound good, but in terms of things like childcare, housing setback, like I'm not as sure about those. I just feel like maybe they need to be more evidence-based. And the whole like extended parental leave thing, if they just took the money that they spent on that and shifted it to just more direct payments and subsidies, but I think more direct payments in general, they'd probably see better results. So maybe more of it's just about smarter versions of the policies they already have. Early marriage promotion, I'm just surprised. Like maybe this is one of those issues of like early marriage promotion really does help, and they're doing a great job with this, and if they didn't do it, things would be a lot worse. But it is interesting to me that despite there being so much traditionalism preached, I mean, I do want to kind of highlight this to people who are in the prenatalist movement when they're like, no, it's all about early marriage. It's 100% early marriage, because
You get that in these countries.
yeah, like that you couldn't do it more than it's done here. Like it's so explicit. You could never get close to the level of early marriage promotion in the Middle East that like in the United States. Like that would just never happen. So it reminds me a little bit of what happened with COVID, where like only when we grounded all flights, functionally speaking, and almost everyone stopped commuting and everyone was inside their house, did we reach the level of emissions that like the Paris Climate Accords
incremental reduction that we needed year over year, every year by the Paris.
And it still wasn't enough. And so I feel like that's kind of this is analogous with the whole marriage thing. Like, even if we went to that level with early marriage promotion in the United States, which would be insane pandemic, mirror world, dystopia level promotion by our standards, by American standards, it would still not be enough. And so I do question. I mean, I'm all for marriage formation. It's so much easier to raise kids when you have someone to help you. Like that's just a logistical truth. This is not it has to be a man and a woman thing. Like I don't care if it's a cat girl and a cat girl, okay? But like the logistics are easier. And then the scaling back family planning thing, like I feel like that's just so dumb. Like this has been shown again and again to not be helpful. I don't even know if we can count that. Maybe we just have to throw it out. Like unless I feel like China is going to be the first country to do this in a way where maybe it works, because unlike with Romania, I think instead of just dumping kids in orphanages where they languish and are not taken care of, I could see China just being like, yeah, we'll take them. Now they're CCP babies and we're going to raise them to be in our CCP army. And it's going to be like the Clone Wars and they're just all going to...
It's going to be the Clone Wars. No, I think China will do that.
Yeah. But see, I think that's the one way where removing reproductive choice and going hyper dystopian is going to work, is if you're like, I'm going to force you to have babies, but also I'm going to raise them. Because you can't force a person to have a baby and expect them to do a good job raising them and like not abandon or abuse them. You're not going to create high tax paying citizens or high productivity citizens if you have this resentful or traumatized or whatever, like coerced slave person.
From the perspective of the state, childcare has always been free, and that needs to change.
That's a really great way. That's a wonderful way of putting it. Yeah. From the perspective of the state, childcare has always been free. Freeloading state.
Freeloading state. They expected these taxpayers. Come on, man.
Oh my God. Now I'm genuinely insulted.
The state is using you, Simone.
Because
it thinks that you care about the future.
How dare they?
Anyway, love you to death.
I love you too.
Great topic. Great job researching it, Simone.
All thanks to Cremiu for inspiring this. But I found the UAE marriage wedding thing, and that's so insane.
That is crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. Okay, I already sent you the link for the other one. I'm ending recording.
The story I'm working on is so engaging.
Yeah. What kind of husband walks up to their wife on a random day and is like, I accidentally wrote a novel today.
Yes. Well, I finally found a very good AI integrated storyteller for like exploring worlds.
Okay.
And so I put an isekai together, which is like a Harry Potter of method rationality, but good. I'll link to it in the comments here so people can read it. But it takes place in like an isekai world. It's got an overly arrogant protagonist who is just had it with this isekai nonsense and decides to take over the world immediately to make things better. And I did it all with the AI, like allowing the AI to, if it presented a challenge to me, or like if I didn't know how like a magical system worked, I would always have the AI sort of lay out the rules of the thought experiment that I was going to have to try to get through. So it was written, you could say, to an extent adversarially, where there wasn't a lot of like, oh, I want this to happen, or I want things to go in this way, which I think makes it roll pretty fun. It's very much like I'm going in and I'm like, okay, we're going to do things in this new way. We're going to have this new technology. It's really fun. It's really
very fun. Methods of rationality. Yeah.
And if people like it and they're like, hey, write more of this, I can continue in this world and try to make like a bigger world and even create with our video game, like a thing so you can explore worlds like this or do this yourself better.
Well, that's the point of the platform that you and Bruno are building, is that while you're starting off with this post-apocalyptic or like post-demographic collapse AI world game, anyone's lore or fan universe can be plugged in and be explored with this really rich format, right? That's what I'm so excited about.
Yeah, that's what I'm really excited about too, is it
Mhm.
creates a system where you can create these really big, persistent, and interesting worlds that you can explore. And that's what we're working on with the Reality Fabricator project, to basically create this, but more adversarial and better. But with this one system, I was just really impressed with it. And I ended up, because I finally had a little bit of time to myself, like, okay, let's actually play through one of these, because I haven't in a long time.
Yeah, enjoy it while it lasts. You're not going to have a private moment for a long time in a bit.
Because we were going for the cruise together.
It's going to be great.